I'm Daniel Levine, and this is the Bio Report.
Though the search for eternal youth has long been the fodder for myths and legends, science has been pushing us closer toward extending healthy years of life and has set some people off on efforts to defy death altogether. Peter Ward, in his new book, The Price of Immortality, The Race to Live Forever, explores a subculture of immortality seekers who have turned to cryonics, as well as efforts to merge man with technology as a way to escape death. The growing understanding of the biology of aging and advances in regenerative medicine, though, are creating the potential to alter notions of human lifespans. We spoke to Ward about his book, Distinguishing Science Fact from Science Fiction, and the growing understanding of the biology of aging that offers the potential for extending healthy years of life. Peter, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be on the show.
We're going to talk about your new book, The Price of Immortality, The Race to Live Forever, various efforts to both extend healthy life and achieve immortality, and where we are on the science behind all of this. Perhaps we should begin with the distinction between people in your book who are pursuing immortality and those working to extend healthy years of life. How different are these two groups and these two goals?
I think they're vastly different. The pursuit of immortality or even radically extended life is on the whole, I think, a slightly more selfish goal. These are people that want to live longer. Personally, they want to experience the future themselves. They don't want to die. And they kind of will do whatever they need to do to get there. Obviously, when you're chasing immortality, that is a much more ambitious goal than just living a little healthier for a little longer. It's and it's most likely impossible, of course, if especially if you take the meaning of immortality literally. The chances of you living forever are extremely remote when you take into account that one day the sun will engulf the earth. So it's as you can imagine, the people involved in immortality and radically extended life, they tend to pursue things that are a little less scientific, and they can get drawn into ideas which maybe don't have the kind of medical or scientific backing that you'd like to see.
The book is filled with these colorful characters, and I think people working on or slowing or reversing aging have become rather mainstream. There is a cultish and almost religious quality to pursuing immortality. Why is this? What did you find?
I think immortality is an obsession that humans have always chased. One of the first recorded written stories is the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is, of course, an immortality story. It's about a central character chasing everlasting life. And then, of course, you have religion, which is always picked up on this desire to sort of live forever. And you obviously, most major Western religions, that one of the central parts of them is the promise of an eternal life. That's more of a spiritual pursuit, but still, it's sort of picking at that nagging fear of death, which seems to be built into all humans as some kind of survival instinct. So given that kind of history, I guess it's not too surprising that there is this kind of cultish sort of mystic vibe in the immortality seekers. It's always been there. And a lot of the people that I spoke to that describe themselves as immortalists, they do sort of have a genuine feeling that they're doing something incredible. And sometimes you sort of get this sense of superiority. And I think you get this a lot with ideas where people are looking far into the future. my previous book was about space, and you kind of got a little bit of it in the space travel. If you went, the people that were pursuing the colonization of space, for example, it's sort of, you don't even get this because it's so far into the future. But unfortunately, that just means that you can look to the future as this mystical place, and you overlook what needs to be done to get there. So I think it's kind of a strange phenomenon, but quite common in these kind of pursuits.
One of the strains in the book is this notion of transhumanism from the 19th century Russian philosopher Fyodorov to the American futurist Ray Kurzweil. What is transhumanism, and has it taken hold as technology has advanced?
Yeah, so transhumanism is essentially, it's a belief system that a belief that basically we should use technology to enhance the human condition in any way possible. That can be as simple as wearing contact lenses, or it can go all the way up to living longer or living forever, becoming some kind of cyborg. So transhumanism is kind of a large umbrella term, and then you have the immortalists, which sit within that as one of the more sort of extreme branches of transhumanism. And if you speak to transhumanists, some say that that strain of thinking goes back as far as the Renaissance. But in my case, I sort of traced it back to where the immortalists, a lot of them see Fedorov as this. So, for example, the Church of Perpetual Life, which is a church which follows immortality, which preaches that we can be immortal. They list Fedorov as one of their prophets. So he was a Russian librarian from the 19th century and philosopher. And he wrote this book called The Common Task, and that basically described how humans should all come together. They should master nature, and in the process make themselves immortal, and also bring back anyone that's ever lived, and really conquer death. So it's interesting that you see someone like him still being used as a sort of example in the transhumanist world. It's so you get this kind of strange blur of transhumanism, and he was also a Christian, and Christianity was very evident in his thinking. So yeah, they still sort of talk about Fedorov today, even if I think a lot of them have kind of misinterpreted some of his message.
Well, you bring up Christianity. That's, certainly selling the idea of immortality and immortal life is been ingrained in religious traditions. Does that carry over with the work of Fyodorov?
I think he's. I think that side of it has definitely been dropped. So transhumanists today are mostly completely atheist, and a lot of them are actually anti-religion. So I think, weirdly, they've taken his final ambition of everyone being immortal, and kept that bit, but they've left out parts of how he wants to go about it, which was quite a sort of spiritual message of the whole of humanity coming together. He didn't particularly believe in capitalism. He didn't particularly believe in, he wouldn't have been a sort of Elon Musk type figure if he was around today at all. Whereas I think maybe the transhumanists kind of see him sort of like that.
A lot of the early efforts around immortality have centered on cryonics. I assume this is just a reflection of the state of technology too, but how does cryonics work?
Yeah, so cryonics, for someone who wants to live forever, is described as their plan B. So if everything they do fails, then cryonics is what they hope will be the kind of backstop that will let them live much longer. So in the absolute crudest terms, it's basically the freezing of a dead body. So when you die, the body is frozen, with the aim of bringing that body back to life when the technology develops. That will allow them to do that. So obviously it's a little bit more complex than that. But the idea is essentially to keep the brain cold, and by doing that to sort of store what makes you inside of it. So that involves sort of putting some kind of biological antifreeze into the body, taking out the blood, and then lowering it to a very low temperature, and keeping it in liquid nitrogen. So
This
yeah, it's
has been a fledgling industry for now about 50 years. How many people have been frozen, and how viable are these businesses?
So at the last count, Alcor, which is the biggest cryonics practitioner, they have around, I think, 190 patients. That's what they call the people they've frozen, their patients. So it's not, it's difficult because some of the numbers are not reliable from the other companies around the world. There aren't many of them. You could definitely say that there's less than 1,000 in the world. And there have been obviously a number of cases where people have been frozen and then they've been defrosted, whether that's through an accident or there's a lot of weird stories in the history of cryonics. It's full of almost comedic mishaps and slapstick events, where people do get defrosted by accident.
I take it when they get defrosted, though, no one has regained consciousness or life.
No, absolutely not.
Just kind of warm dead body.
Yeah, just usually just warmed it, and then at that point they're buried. Usually, it's kind of like you just given up. In terms of how viable they are as businesses, it's a strange one. Obviously, if a cryonics company goes bankrupt, then that's a really big problem. One of the early issues with cryonics was funding it. So the first person that ever cryofroze a person, Bob Nelson, he was looking after all these bodies that he'd frozen. He ran out of money, and he wasn't able to top up the capsules that they were held in with the liquid nitrogen, so they just melted, and they got extremely hot, and so there's no chance of them ever being reanimated. So it's a risky endeavor.
Has the science and technology around cryonics evolved, made actual advances?
They've made some advances. There's the sort of sister science of cryobiology, which is just freezing it, dealing with anything in low temperatures, which they do sort of take inspiration from there, the cryonicists. Not as much evolution as you'd think. It's a vastly different procedure in terms of what chemicals go into the body to try and preserve it. And then since the start, they've developed a new sort of option, which is just cryopreserving the head. So that's when they just cut off the head and freeze the head, and the body is buried. So that's actually much more popular. It's a cheaper option as well. And it kind of makes sense because you probably wouldn't, if you were very old when you died, you wouldn't want the same body anyway. And if you believe that you're going to be reanimated, you may as well believe that you'll be given a shiny new body on the other side. Yeah.
Is there any evidence that it's possible to take a living organism that was frozen and bring it back to life?
Not in the way that the cryonics does it. There's sort of vague sort of evidence of people going into icy lakes and dying, and then coming back and having all their memories. But there's no suggestion that this will ever be possible, and there's also no suggestion that the technique that they use to preserve people in cryonics would actually be effective in storing anything. And to be fair to cryonics practitioners, they do kind of acknowledge that they do see it as a long shot themselves, and so that's why it's Plan B. But the phrase that they roll out is it's better than being in the control group, which is what they see everyone who's not cryogenically frozen.
At the other end of those pursuing mortality are people who are looking to upload the mind. What is being imagined here?
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways of doing this theoretically. Obviously, it's not been done. So one would be to sort of record the personality of a person, what makes you you. So one way of doing that would be to take everything you ever interacted with, every sort of message you sent, every phone call you made, every documented communication from you, and then building a sort of a version of yourself, an AI version of yourself. And that obviously has a lot of flaws because we're not the sum of our communication. There's a lot of things that go on inside our heads that we don't communicate, which I think is a good thing. Maybe some people don't do that. I'm not sure. But I think, so that way, I don't think you're getting everything. So the other way is that you could scan someone's brain and just take everything out of it and upload it somewhere. And in terms of the technology, we have to do that. I think the last we've done sort of a very tiny slither of a mouse's brain, and that took months and months and months. So we're nowhere near being able to scan a brain, and we're not even sure if you scan the brain that would get everything that made up our consciousness. Some people think that even things like the microbiology of our gut has an impact on our personality and who we are. So it's all very theoretical.
Do people see this as a way to preserve an individual's thoughts and experience, or create some sort of digital self that a loved one might engage with? Or do they actually see themselves living and having new experiences as kind of a digital self?
Yeah, there's definitely some people do hope that they could create a sort of digital entity and then live a life afterwards. It depends really how you define consciousness. If you see consciousness as if you see continuity as a key part of consciousness, then that doesn't really work. It would almost be just a copy of you. But yeah, there's some people that think that you could download it into a robot of some kind and then create that. There's groups like the Terrorism movement who are working on this, and they are also a registered religion. And they created a robot of their founder's wife, the Bina robot, and that's a sort of first attempt, but it's nothing like you'd imagine. It's only from the neck up, and it doesn't really sound or act like a human. But they do collect sort of these things they call mind files, which you can sort of give them all your information, and they try and store that in every way possible. Yeah, so there are people trying it, but there's huge sort of philosophical questions which need to be answered first. I mean, like for example, my 60-year-old self will probably be extremely different to who I am now. So which one of those would I preserve? Which one is me, I guess, is one of the key questions. And then also there's the question of memories. We lose memories. Some memories are only triggered by people, places, or experiences. So if we were just catapulted into the future as this digital version of ourselves, then we'd lose a lot of who we are because we wouldn't have those triggers to bring those memories to the front of our minds.
There is a lot of scientific research being conducted today into the biology of aging. You reference work on the hallmarks of aging. How well is the biology of aging understood today?
I think for a long time, it seems like it's been underfunded and under-researched. It was only fairly recently that people seriously started to look into the biology of aging with the sort of aim and the goal that we could ease those effects. And part of the problem is actually the first group of people that we spoke about, the people that want to be immortal. I think whenever a researcher says that they want to work on how to deal with the effects of aging, it's quite easy for them to get thrown into the pile with, you want people to live forever. And that can seriously have serious negative effects on their funding. But I think in terms of the biology, we do need to look into it a lot more closely. I think if you look at the demographics of the United States, for example, most European countries, we've got this huge sort of wedge of the population which is going to be extremely old and need a lot of help, and they're going to be getting heart disease and cancers and everything that comes from aging. And I think there's going to be a point where we wish that we'd studied aging a lot more closely, rather than the individual diseases.
There are many diseases of aging, but should people think of aging as a disease?
I think we should. So there was a study back in the 90s um, that suggested that if we cured cancer and heart disease, it would only raise the life expectancy in the US by around 3 years. Um, and I think if we instead address aging with the same resources that we attack those diseases, then you would find that those diseases were vastly reduced, and we'd be much better at dealing with them. And it's clear that once you reach a certain biological age, once your body has aged to a certain point, it's not a case of if something's going to get you. It's what's going to get you. So you could survive cancer, and then heart disease is around the corner. Something's going to get you at that point. So if we treated aging as a disease, and saw that was the sort of root cause where all these other diseases emerged, you could make a massive impact potentially. And so there are clearly things that go on in our bodies when we get older that create the perfect environment for things like cancer to thrive. And so if we can reverse the processes that make that environment, then we could make people live a lot more comfortable lives for potentially longer. But obviously that does not mean we'll live forever.
One of the practical challenges of developing therapies to slow, halt, or reverse the process of aging is that regulators don't really have a pathway for such a therapy. How would clinical trials and a clinical pathway work for a therapy to address aging?
Yeah, it's a tricky question, because it's difficult if you think about it. How can you say that someone's aging has been slowed, and how long would you have to study that person? I guess there's so many sort of external factors, so many things that can make us age. It would be difficult, and it is difficult. There are certain biomarkers that you can look at, but even then, we're sort of getting new research of how important they are. Things like telomere length. I think researchers originally thought that telomere length was crucial, and now maybe it's not so simple whether you want long telomeres or short telomeres, or maybe just in between. It's a really tricky thing to do, but it's also something that really frustrates the sort of life extension and immortalist communities. They believe that these drugs and medicines and treatments which could potentially address aging are not getting into human trials fast enough. And some of them are actually taking the initiative themselves and just taking them themselves. There's a huge amount of medical tourism in this area. People going away to do sort of stem cell treatments or gene therapies, or they get their drugs from abroad.
There's a lot of assumptions that get made around how we might be able to do this, and then we try something and find it has a counter effect. Cellular senescence is one of the hallmarks of aging. One thing people have tried to do is remove these cells to extend life, but it turned out they have an important role in protecting us. Can you explain cellular senescence and what happened when people tried to remove senescent cells?
Yeah, so obviously our cells are not immortal. They do die, and when they die, they become senescent. And people have referred to these as kind of zombie cells once they become senescent. So over time, and this is one of the things that happen as we age, we accumulate senescent cells in our body.
These are cells that no longer divide?
Yeah. So they no longer divide. They no longer really do anything useful as far as we could initially tell. They do secrete sort of these proteins, and that secretion does do some damage and does do some damage to tissue near it. So senescent cells for a while, everyone was saying, okay, well, we need to get rid of them. That was the obvious answer. Let's just find out how to get rid of as many senescent cells as possible. But then there was other voices that said, actually, these senescent cells play a crucial role in keeping other cells from becoming cancerous. So it's actually quite a crucial process. There's another study more recently that said if you did eliminate senescent cells, it would affect the liver in some way as well. And And I think it's a much more complex than people maybe from the outside looking in realize. I think certainly the sort of the amateur biologists who are trying to make themselves immortal don't quite realize how I guess how complex it is. I mean, not all senescent cells are the same. So you could probably get rid of some and others would be useful. And maybe the what a lot of researchers are working on is how to stop that secretion instead. So stop them secreting the proteins which are harmful.
As you looked at the world of research that's being conducted, have you seen anything yet you believe would translate into an extension of healthy lifespans?
Yeah, I think there is a lot of promising research out there. Definitely to make us healthy for longer, to increase health span. The problem is that you need sort of patience. It's not there yet, and it's too early to say. And I think that's exactly what people don't have, and that's understandable, because if you're getting older and you want to live longer, then the last thing you want to do is wait for more research. You want to try everything there is. In terms of extending our lifespan, I don't think there's been anything that has made a mouse live longer than its expected 5 to 7 years. So that's not saying it won't happen, but it's just a kind of indicator of how far off we are. There's lots of promising things, and obviously whenever something is found to slightly de-age or extend the health span of a mouse or another animal, you get these headlines which all over the world, miracle cure, we're finally going to stop aging, and yeah, that probably doesn't help the expectation when especially for these people that are working on it. And I think there are a lot of potential treatments out there that say that they will make you live healthier for longer, and some of them are real, some of them are completely false. But I think one thing that I think just listen to your doctor would be the best advice I give to everyone, and do the sort of basic things that they say. You could go and get sort of these expensive stem cell treatments, but I think you'd probably just be better off doing the common sense things, and that would have a better impact on your health span.
Not long ago, we featured Chris Mason, a principal investigator on NASA's twin study. One of the things that study found was that telomeres of astronauts in space actually got longer. This is the caps on the end of chromosomes, and a biomarker for longevity. What they eventually determined was that it wasn't space travel, but the highly regimented diet and exercise that astronauts had while in space that accounted for this. What's known about diet and exercise as a means of life extension, and do we overcomplicate the issue?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. I still think the best thing, I did a lot of research into a lot of different potential ways to make yourself live longer. And the best thing still is to eat healthily and exercise. That's the absolute guaranteed thing that will make you live a healthier and probably longer life. It's weird because anything that there's this sort of weird flip side of the immortality coin, where you've potentially got long life on one side, but cancer is weirdly on the other. You could do something that would improve your one biomarker that would improve your longevity, but that could also increases your chance of cancer. So yeah, you can try all these things, but you're best off probably just living a healthy lifestyle, which a lot of these people do, and they're just trying to max it out by doing extra things. But I think if we ever do reverse aging, if we ever do crack this, it will be an extremely complicated solution in the end. It won't be sort of one silver bullet. It won't be, something to improve our telomere length or anything. It will be a series of different things that we have to do, and preventative medicine to help us live longer and live healthier. So yeah, that has great sort of scientific barriers, but also, I guess, societal barriers in how easy it is to get preventative medicine to people.
There's a notion among some people that there's an upper limit to life, about 120 years or so. Is there any case for that, or do you believe, as others have suggested, that the first person to live to 150 has already been born?
From the gerontologists I spoke to, most of them believe that we have an upper limit, and it is around 120. Some of them did say go along with the 150 person has already been born. It's sort of split the researchers, I think. But I do think the majority do think that 120 is about our limit, and at that point you're going to die of something. Interestingly, that from the people that do live extremely long lives, I spoke to a geneticist, George Church, who said, they have looked at they have mapped the genomes of these people that live to very long lives, and they haven't really told them very, very much. There's just too many different things, or too many possible things that could be causing them to live longer. So yeah, I'm happy to be proven wrong, and if I live to 150 myself, I'm not going to complain. But I don't think, as long as I'm healthy for those 150 years, I wouldn't want to have like 50 years of hell. But from what I see and from what I hear from people that are far more intelligent than me, I don't think that I'll see a 150-year-old during my lifetime.
The book is The Price of Immortality, The Race to Live Forever. Peter Ward, author. Peter, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
Thanks for listening. The Bio Report is a production of the Levine Media Group. To automatically download this podcast each week, subscribe to our RSS feed or through iTunes or other podcast manager. To join our mailing list, go to levinemediagroup.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to drop us a line or are interested in sponsoring this podcast, send email to danny@levinemediagroup.com. Special thanks to Jonah Levine, who composed our theme music, and the Jonah Levine Collective, which performs it.